Hi there. This video is for entertainment purposes only. Thank you for visiting my channel once again, and if you're new, nice meeting you. Welcome. Now, please do not forget to press the subscribe button, give a thumbs up for like, and please do share. This is the first video of a series of 4 videos that I will be doing on the equal opportunity of slavery. Today, we will look at the origin of slavery and some of the many societies that practice slavery throughout the ages. We will also look at the types of slavery, sources for slaves, and slave trade networks, and people. We look at groups of people who seem to be in places we would least expect to find them because of slavery, such as there are over 1 million Afro-Iranians, and also in Turkey. So we will look at those groups of people and a few more at the end of this video. Now, before we begin, let me introduce myself. And I like to read, even when I'm talking about myself. I don't want to forget anything. Now, my name's Winifred Davis. I have been a shaman psychic medium and a traditional and spiritual counselor and healer for the past 37 years. And in 3 weeks' time, it will be a grand 38 years. Well, I tell you, I'm not a spring chicken, that's for sure. Now, I'm also an author, an essayist, poet, and former spoken word movement performer. And I did say that one day I will explain what the last one is. You know, I subscribe to no religion. When I say that, I mean I subscribe to no religion. I believe in universal justice and truth. Now, with universal justice, there are no exceptions to its rules. With the imposter justice of man, there is an exception to every rule. You know, some people are definitely above the law, and the laws do not apply to them. They operate above and beyond the law. Now, the truth, there's no my side, your side to the truth. The truth stands unopposed, and there's only one truth, not many truths. When I say not many truths, I'm saying if there's one truth, there's no my side, your side, or their side to the truth. There's only one. Now, I don't subscribe to any religion. I do not. And when I say that, I mean I subscribe to no religion. Now, please remember that I'm not here to lead anyone. I'm not here to convert anyone. Just as I don't want anyone to lead me. Each man must evolve according to his own light. Consequently, what I'm saying here, you take it. I'm just delivering a message or delivering messages. You either take it or you leave it. If you are open to the light I am showing with my messages, and if you do not understand something, feel free to ask the question, and I will get back to you in the comment section below, or email me, and my email is also listed below. Now, as I said, I'm here to deliver messages. Who am I delivering the messages from or for. I'm delivering the messages. I'm just a vessel from the collective. Who's the collective? Well, the collective is comprised of members of the higher hierarchies, including the archangels and my many guides. And it might sound presumptuous to say I'm getting messages from the archangels, but it's not. Each of us has the capacity to connect and communicate with any archangel and with the Creator. We don't need intermediaries to do any of that. We can get messages that we deliver, but it doesn't mean that we are intermediaries. Because at the end of the day, each man is responsible for the well-being of his own soul and for his own actions. Now, my duty is only to my conscience. And my conscience is the light that guides the free will I was given at creation. Each of us was given free will and a conscience, that light to guide that free will at creation. And that conscience is what links us back to the Creator by whatever name we choose. I like to say that's something that is greater than us. And that conscience is what makes us responsible for the consequences of our own actions and the well-being of our own soul. And I'm being redundant when I say our own soul or my own, but that is to emphasize what is. So that conscience that makes each of us responsible for our own actions, accountable for our own actions. So we can't blame the bully. We can't blame our parents. We can't blame king or country or our general or the devil or demons that we sometimes use to as a get out of jail free card. Each of us is responsible for our own action. Now, those messages that I get sometimes, they might seem very offensive and brutal, but the truth might be an offense to some, but it is not a spiritual mistake. It is not a sin. And if we're going to restore equilibrium to our soul, then we need to face the truth. We need to look in that mirror of self-reflection and face what we see in that mirror. And sometimes it's not a very pretty sight, I know. But face it, as I said, we must, if we are going to move forward and ascend up that ladder of soul restoration. Bring equilibrium to our soul. Now, because those messages are brutal sometimes, I might say, well, let me try and pretty it up, but I won't. I cannot, because I would not be doing my duty. And as my great-grandmother Ella, who, by the way, was my father during my Crusade journey, and my mother during my journey in Nice, in Provence, in France, in the 11th century, as she used to say, me mouth and me market. So me get it, so me sell it. My mouth is like my market. As I get it, that's how I have to sell it. Right? So what I get, I give you exactly what I get. And And me not go hold me mouth a ground fi talk, left me make me talk. In other words, I'm not going to face plant to tell you the truth. Let me speak. So I have to tell you the brutal truth as I get it. But then we always have a solution to help move us up the ladder. So we don't just criticize and tell you the brutal truth. We also give you the means and the way to improve. Now, as I said, I'm not here to lead or convert anyone, so please remember that. Please do not freely interpret what I say. Say exactly what I say. If I say the sky is blue, I didn't say sky blue, even though it's the sky. Sometimes it's not even sky blue, actually. I didn't say midnight blue. I didn't say navy blue or marine blue. I said blue. That means all shades of blue, and I think there must be thousands of shades of blue. But you'll know that it's blue. And if I say that there is a tiny fish in a small aquarium, I didn't say there's a tiny goldfish, a tiny angelfish, or a tiny catfish that could grow to be quite large and then eats the other fish. No, I said a tiny fish in a small aquarium. Do not interpret, add to, and then give to someone else who's going to do the same thing. And by the time you get to the 10th, 12th, 20th person, it becomes, that tiny fish becomes a big old whale. And that small aquarium becomes a vast ocean. Now, there's a big difference there, because a whale is not even a fish. It's a mammal. Now, as I said, so me get it, so me sell it. And so I sell it to you, so you should sell it to somebody else. Don't add anything. Purity, right? Now, I call out injustice and folly when I see it, even with myself. I talk with myself. I have conversations with myself. And yes, I even answer myself sometimes. Because when I think, what did I do now? Oh, that's not right, Winnie. That's not right at all. So I have those conversations because I'm looking in my mirror of self-reflection. Not to say, ooh, you got to do better. Right? So when I see injustice and folly, I call it out. As I said, even with myself, I'm never without my mirror of self-reflection. Not to say that I don't make mistakes. Oh boy, do I ever make mistakes. But I'm not afraid to admit to those mistakes because I want to learn. I want to restore equilibrium to my soul. And if someone points out something that I'm doing that's wrong, well, I might not like to hear it. I might be a little, embarrassed. But I'll think about it. And I will try to improve. Can't be too arrogant. When we're arrogant, we never learn anything. Humility opens the door to learning. Judgment, arrogance closes it. And so those who are arrogant usually does not travel with a mirror of self-reflection, and therefore they can't have any shame. They can't see that sometimes they're telling you, don't do this, but they're doing it themselves. They're too arrogant, or they believe that either it's not the same thing because they're the ones doing it. You're different, right? So when I see folly and injustice, I call it out. And I have no favorites. As you will see in my video number 28, entitled Reality Check with Knowledge. So please do not use any of the folly that I call out to advance bigotry against any group, regardless of the masks, or what I call those stupid masks, around which we commit so many spiritual mistakes and are mean and nasty to others. If you repeat what I say with regards to these follies, please repeat the facts as well that I use to debunk them. Don't just call out the follies and then you use it to say, oh, well, you know, these people, they're, you know, this and whatever, to denigrate them. Use the facts that I use to debunk all those follies. In other words, remember exactly what I say. No sound bites. The mouthful. So that means don't give little snippets out of context. Give the mouthful of what I said and what I say with regards to those follies. Now, at times, this channel is, you know, I started it to discuss the truth that is reincarnation and its many facts. And at times, I will discuss current events as I see fit because they are relevant to the truth that is reincarnation and its facts. And the truth that is reincarnation and its fact, it is life. It's not just there as some thing in a book, right? It is what we're living. It is who we are, why we're here, what we're about, where we're going, where we're coming from. It is the understanding and the ancient knowledge. So it's not some pie in the sky thing. And so it applies. That's why I will speak about current events, because they are a part of this truth that is reincarnation and its facts. It is not just knowledge that cannot be applied. Knowledge without application, what's the use, right? Now, this is to help us, and you get that knowledge to help you move along in life. Now, this is a very special cup runneth over period of greater transition. Now, these periods of greater cup runneth over periods of greater transition are few and far between, right? They are once in a blue moon type of events. Now, periods of transition, what we might call apocalypse, revelation, Armageddon, they're happening all the time at some place on this earth at different times, right? But this one is a special one. This is a cup runneth over one, when so much group karma or karmic debt has accumulated. And there needs to be a purge when the climate is affected. Everywhere on this earth is affected. And I explained that in my book, Thoughts on the Past. It's listed below in volume 1 and volume 2. Okay, explain exactly, you know, step by step, why and how we have this greater period of transition. And it's a lot of things happening, an awful lot of things all over the world. And as I said, you know, the climate crisis, not crisis, but crisis, because there are many things going on, right? And as I said, everyone and everything is affected. This is a providential time. This was written in the Akashic records. So this is what is written. Not much that we can do, but the world is not going to end. we will carry on. It's painful, very painful. But it's like if you have a sore, an ulcer, and it's scabbed over, it's not healing. And so the doctor has to take off the scab, with a health professional, has to take off the scab and debride it, clean it out, and it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. But in order for it to heal, that's what has to be, and that's what's going on, and it's very, very painful. And as much as I know, and others know, that what's to be must be, what is written, maktub, maktub, then so it is, but it still doesn't stop us from feeling that pain, so much pain, knowing all that's happening now, seeing children and babies suffering, doesn't stop. But what's to be must be. But in the end, most of the guns will fall silent, at least for a while. And the cycle begins again. Please do not forget that there's no peace in Gaza, and the genocide and ethnic cleansing still continues there and in the West Bank. It's getting worse by the day. Nothing has really changed. In the fog of war, and that's why Israel is lighting so much fire, other than the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to save himself from prison, lighting all these fires in a morally bankrupt society where most of the population see nothing wrong in making unalive even babies. And so in the fog of war, they're bent, and that's what's going on, because now we're consumed with Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Great Persia and Iran. So we're not focusing on what's going on in Gaza, where babies are starving still, too weak even to cry from the pangs of hunger and the pain of disease and injury from guns, bombs, American bombs. Too weak even to cry from the pain of those injuries or the pangs of hunger. Still going on. Bags of bones, walking bags of bones, some of them, not playing as children should be. 2-year-olds, 1.5-year-olds having to carry water, trying to find water to drink, clean water. That's what's going on still. And please don't forget it. It might not be on the TV because of all the fires, and now they want to start with Turkey, which I did speak about from a 1.5 years ago. I think it was, I think my video of March 2025, the vision that I saw, that Turkey would also be next, and Cyprus, and now we hear it. My guides are always dead on. But anyhow, let me try and read, because I will just get carried away here. Now, as I said, the West Bank. Okay, so let me just do something here. Palestinians refuse to leave this time. The Palestinians in Gaza. They refused to leave as they did in 1948 because that's the aim. Terror. The Zionists came to terrorize the Palestinian people out of their land. They said it. We went through this a couple of videos ago through their own mouths, out of the horses' mouths. And we see the Nakba. We're seeing verbatim what played out in 1947-48 in the West Bank. And I wrote about that, where I say the stage is set. Benjamin Netanyahu's final curtain call. He's in his 9th life. This video is for entertainment purposes only. He's in his 9th life. And he's behaving like someone who, well, he's in his 9th life. Leave it at that. And we see now the last Christian village that's being attacked too in the West Bank. Well, what do those silly supremacists, Zionists, Christians in America, what do they have to say about that now? Christian village. Wow. Being attacked. My goodness. Could you imagine? But that's supremacist ideology and practices, remember? It's cannibalistic. Turn on each other. Those poor people. The main aim, as we said, were children and babies. And think about Lebanon. Let us not forget Lebanon, just blowing up history. Thousands of years of history, these Zionists. Just bombing them. They're all about destruction. Just destruction. Rule rubble. And as the son-in-law, the one who wanted all the colored peoples to die during COVID, so he withheld the PPI from the blue states. The man who has those soulless eyes, but he has a soul. He has a conscience. He'll find that conscience one day, talking about finish the job in Gaza, wants to build resorts there. The one who is now in Albania wants to build resorts and AI centers in Gaza on the bones, the corpses of babies and children. But his reincarnation, he was a prostitute in Italy. His wife was the wife of Paul Joseph Goebbels. Reincarnations we can understand now. Remember, this video is for entertainment purposes only. Now, don't forget the children in Yemen, as I said, Lebanon, the DRC and Sudan, where there are over 15 million people in famine. It's a horror show there. And Israel's in that mix-up there. It spread its wings all over the world, creating nothing but havoc and misery, along with others. Now, please go to my website and go to the section on kindness. I have listed there agencies, organizations, most of them with the UN, for the different areas of places where refugees and children, Syrian refugees that they would have, the DRC, Yemen, UNRWA, and if you can, please donate to those organizations. The link is there for each one. Now, we must never forget, children. Every child in the world belongs to each of us, no matter the mask of those children. And whether they're the children of the perpetrators like Israel or the children of the victims, and who themselves are also, some of them are also children. Some of the children are victims, I should say. We mustn't forget any of them who are suffering because of adults and their forever war. And to what end? To what end? Makes no sense. Anyhow, as I said, this video is for entertainment purposes only, and now I'm going to start. Wars disturb me. They do. And especially the suffering of children and babies. Now, slavery. And this is the introduction to that equal opportunity that all of us have engaged in at some point in our journey in this earthly plane. Now, slavery is the ultimate power play. While there are many types of slavery, you have serfdom, debt bondage, you have indentured labor, but it's a form of slavery, really, when you think about it. You know, you're almost a slave for 10 years, 5 years, whatever the term. But the one type of slavery that is the ultimate power play is chattel slavery. Now, what is chattel slavery? It is the ownership of another human being. This ownership entitles the owner to buy, sell, maim, and make unalive without consequence another human being. Now, there's a rich scholarship, of debates about the precise definitions of slave and slave society. But it converges on the key criteria, which includes slaves as property, elites, economic dependency on slaves. So that's the dependency of the elites, of the feudal masters, the oligarchs, so to speak, on slaves. There's also the violent domination. Violent, the whippings and beatings and even making unalive domination of slaves by their owners. And we look at the Romanian one. That one is very ghastly. And natal alienation of slaves. Slavery exists for production, as in the transatlantic slave trade. Transatlantic slave trades, that's the one dealing mostly with the Gold Coast, West Africa, that came across the Atlantic to the Americas of black people, African slaves, by the Europeans across the Atlantic to the Americas. As well as, so you have slaves for production, right? So that's working on your tobacco farms, your sugarcane fields, etc. As well as you have slaves for status and prestige, as the Ottomans did as well. That was very important for them for prestige and status. Slavery is the ultimate, power play. Once again, the apex, the height of man's power on earth. We might note that the domination is so complete. You own that slave and the fear within that slave. You dominate his body and his mind to the point that you can entrust your slaves with food, with your food, the children and the elderly, from the cradle to the grave. Once a man, twice a child, right? So in that man stage, you dominate that slave. And that slave actually takes you when you're helpless, when you're a child. And it's that slave who's with you when you are old and you're a child again and can't help yourself. And then when you're a man, in that man stage, that middle stage, that's when you dominate that slave. Now that slave, when you are in those two stages, the child stage, so the babies, children, and the elderly could do whatever they want to do to you. But they're so dominated. The domination is so complete that they don't do anything. In most instances, that was how it is. See? Psychology, right? Psychology. When you can dominate someone's mind, you make them do anything. That's brainwashing in a way, right? That's, like propaganda. That's what they go on. That. So not only do we enslave others, and I say others in quotes, meaning people captured from other lands, but we also enslave those within our lands, as we will see, for example, in Korea, of the same group based on other masks. So you have, for example, okay, you're all Koreans, but you use other masks, such as social status, for example, to enslave other Koreans, right? Social stratification or hierarchy is necessary for the practice of slavery in a society. Consequently, most hunter-gatherer societies do not usually engage in the practice of slavery. Otherwise, slavery is equal opportunity. And most societies have practiced slavery in some form or other in their history. In one of the earliest known comprehensive set of laws, the Code of Hammurabi, written during the reign of Hammurabi, king of Babylon, Hammurabi, and he reigned between 1792 before the Common Era, so BCE. I prefer to use BCE instead of before Christ, BC, to 1750 BCE. There are laws that he enacted that pertain specifically to slave and slave owners. We must recognize that all slavery is anathema to the soul. Spiritual mistakes. It's wrong, right? It's wrong. We shouldn't be doing it. It does not adhere to the divine principles of the fatherhood of God, brotherhood of man, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Love. That which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself. For I am my brother's keeper. We were not put on this earth to have dominion over anyone. That's supremacist ideology and practices, and that is one of the reasons why we are here on this earth, and we have to keep coming back again and again to try to bring balance, restore equilibrium to our soul. Now, for example, we often excuse the slavery of Africans by Africans as being more benign, better than the slavery in America. But that is incorrect. No slavery is better than any slavery because no one should be a slave. All forms of slavery must be condemned in all degrees, from the first to the nth degree. The racialization of slavery should give false comfort to those in America who dream of and salivate at the idea of returning to the good old days when black people were enslaved, like the American Manchurian regime right now. And unfortunately, almost 40% of Americans, the ones who support that regime, they should think twice. Once slavery exists in a society, no one and no group in that society will be immune from enslavement. Slavery in a society is a slippery slope for all who are not at the top of that hierarchy. History teaches us that today for me, tomorrow for you. Today for me, tomorrow for you. Do not rejoice at my misfortune. Your day will come. Wicked acts that we commit are more contagious than good ones. Well, that is like the same thing that is happening, for example, in America right now, where you had an awful lot of people who voted for the Whore of Babylon to enact his horrific immigration law, whatever he's doing with his ICE agents. And then now some of them are saying, oh my God, I didn't think it was intended for me, like a lot of Venezuelans who voted for him and they see their relatives sent home. Or Americans, white Americans who voted for him and then their wives or their husbands, brown peoples, oftentimes are also deported, and now they start to crying. It's sort of like, you didn't know. It was okay to do it to somebody else, but you never thought it would happen to you. So that which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself. So you should never engage in advancing wicked acts. Now, it is worthwhile to note that slavery is not only physical, but also mental. Obsession and addiction are two forms of mental slavery that also becomes physical. In these instances, we cede our free will to one thing or other, be it money, drugs, ideology, alcohol, or other things. That to which we have ceded, given, our free will and denied the spirit becomes our master. This is not a judgment on those with serious addiction, because addiction is a complicated matter. Okay? So it's not as I said, it's not a judgmental call at all. Okay? It's not. The origin of slavery. When did slavery begin? Slavery is as old as man's existence on earth. Through the eyes of the soul and its history, slavery began when the second wave of souls came to help their trapped brothers. And I discussed that in my book, Another World Through the Eyes of the Soul, and also in Thoughts on the Past, volumes 1 and 2, and you will understand about the second wave of souls. I won't go over that again, and in some of my videos I also discuss that. Now, as I discussed before in some of my videos, when souls, okay, so those are the daughters of Nod that they refer to in the Bible, when they decide, and I'm using, I use things from the Bible, but I explain that as well. Okay, I explain that as well, and I put the Bible in context. Okay, it's some people like to say it's a holy book and whatever, but I discuss that. Okay, I discuss that. So I take that out. That would be sort of like the daughters and sons of Nod decided to enter the processes unfolding on earth and inserted themselves into molds that were not meant for them. In other words, that spirit form comes down, and when you enter into a mold that's meant for crustacean, for example, a crab, but you enter into that mold, you're not a crustacean, but as I said, I explain all of that in the book. It's not complicated, really, but you have to go to the book. Okay, so I'm just trying to give an overview here. So they went into molds that were not meant for them in some instances, in order to get into those molds, because you're robbing the crab from its form, its mold. So what do you do in order to get the mold, the container of the crab? What did you do? You murdered the crab, right? You murdered the crab. And other spiritual mistakes. So they became trapped, unable to extricate themselves from their prison of matter, right? Remember now, as spirits, matter is, it's the physical stuff. As spirits, you're not physical, right? You're not inside the prison of our senses, for sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling. No, but now you've entered that. That's matter. Coming in the Adam and Eve mold, so that's man and woman. Okay, so now the human, right? That was created in order to facilitate us, because we weren't supposed to be here. So we started entering into what we shouldn't have been in, but in order to facilitate so that they could help those who were trapped, and new molds were created, male and female. Okay, what I call Adam and Eve molds, created to facilitate their entrance, the spirits who came to help the trapped ones in the earthly plane. Other souls, right, came to help their trapped brothers. Like the first wave, though, those who became trapped, some of these souls in the Adam and Eve mold also strayed and rebelled against their destiny. Atlantis, and there are a lot of people, once you start talking, they say, oh no, that's, I think it was Plato or Aristotle, I can't remember which one. Oh no, that's their made up story, but not in my view. Not in my view, and I trust my view. There are many things we have yet to discover, and it's not conspiracy theory either. and my upcoming book, we shall see and hear of it. Atlantis was the most technologically advanced of the different colonies of the original state of Mu. And they like to say lost continent of Mu, but no continent is lost, really. It was also in Atlantis that many great spiritual mistakes were committed. And we can know that because it was more technologically advanced. So, based on what I've discussed in some of my other videos, we can garner from that why that would be so. Remember, with miscreants, and when a society advances in certain ways and you can gain power, etc., etc. Now the rescue souls themselves, okay, who had come, some of them to help the Trap Brothers, were no longer aligned in purpose. So these rescue souls, they divided. There were those who got caught up in the whole power story, you know, supremacist ideology and practice, and there were those who wanted to concentrate on doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. Now they split into two groups, as I was just saying, the sons of Belial and the sons of the one God, according to Edgar Casey. The sons of Belial became entranced by the pleasures, which is what also entranced the ones who got trapped, the first wave, by the pleasures of the earth, and realizing that they could have power over their trap brothers, decided to enslave them rather than free them. It was on some of these trapped souls that the first plastic surgeries were performed. And I'll get into that in another book in the future. Not this year, though. Indeed, this was the ultimate power play. Now, I'm going to discuss now societies that are exceptions to the practice of slavery. As previously stated, most societies engaged or were involved in some or all aspects of the institution of slavery, traders, owners, or enslaved. Now, in other words, the institution of slavery, once again, is equal opportunity. But there are exceptions. Among these rare exceptions of societies that did not engage in the institution of slavery down through the ages, okay? Not just with the transatlantic slave trade, not in the common era, but down through the ages from before ancient Egypt and beyond. There were two societies in West Africa, the Kingdom of Enri and the Igbo, and the Serer Noon and Ndiege of the Serer, a diverse ethnic group found in Senegal. Now, the Kingdom of Enri, located in what is now Anambra State in southeastern Nigeria, the theocratic Kingdom of Enri, believed to be the cradle, the birthplace of the Igbo, or Ndigbo, was founded in the 10th century. The Kingdom of Enri espoused peace and nonviolence, justice and harmony with creation. Violence was seen as an abomination. Now, Enri did not practice slavery, nor did they partake in any aspect of the slave trade. It welcomed, as a matter of fact, outcasts from other societies and runaway slaves who were freed. Okay, so once they entered the Kingdom of Enri, they were freed. Now, for the Serer Noon and Ndiege. The Serer are an ethno-religious group in West Africa, including southern Mauritania, that's where they were found, northern Gambia, and Senegal, where they comprise, now in Senegal, they comprise approximately 15% of the population. To escape invasion by Islamic and other forces, the Serer, known for their expertise in farming, migrated from their place of origin in the Senegal River Valley between the 11th and 12th centuries, and then again between the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, for the Serer, to enslave another human being is regarded as an enslavement of their soul, thereby preventing the very soul of the slave owner or trader from entering Janil, the sacred place where good souls go after their physical body has departed the world of the living. In accordance with the teachings of the Serer religion, bad souls will not enter Janil. Their departed souls will not be guided by the ancestors to this sacred abode, but will be rejected, thereby making them lost and wandering souls. To reincarnate or to be sanctified as a saint or ancestral spirit, which they call Pangul, one had to first enter Janil. Panguls, ancestral spirits, intercede with the divine Rug. As such, the Serer, especially the Serer Nun and Ndiege, who were the victims of Islamic jihads and enslavement, did not practice much in slavery, and when they did, it was merely personal revenge. So if they did, it was, as they say, personal revenge. You had something against the person, so maybe you would find a slave trader and sell that person to the slave trade. But the society in general, no, they didn't do that. Now in Korean, this is very interesting actually, you have the world's longest unbroken chain of slavery. And many people didn't know that slavery existed in Korea. Whereas the institution of slavery did not exist in the kingdom of Enri, and among the Serer Nun and Ndiege, Korea was a slave society, or for at least 1500 years, reaching its peak during the Choson, and forgive my pronunciations here, dynasty. The enslaved population reached its peak of at least 30% of the population, and perhaps as much as 40% in the south. Choson, Korea, was, according to Kim, it's one of my references. According to Kim, one of the most enduring, slavery in Korea was one of the most enduring and prolific slave societies in world history. In fact, despite invasions by the Mongols and the Japanese during the 13th and 16th centuries, respectively, the slaveholding system continued. According to Peterson, which is another one of my references, hereditary slaveholding through several dynasties became part of the longest unbroken chain of slavery of any country on earth. So, once again, Korea, according to Peterson, In Korea, hereditary slave holding through several dynasties became part of the longest chain of slavery of any country on earth. Not only was Korea a slave society, but there was also a slave trade facilitated by Korean defectors and commoners that saw Koreans sold to both Japanese and Portuguese slave traders. With Nagasaki, so that's Nagasaki in Japan, as a slave trading hub, sorry, Koreans were sold in Japan as well as in the Portuguese colony of Macau. A few were sent to the Portuguese colony of Goa in India. And now Goa was they're mostly Catholics actually in Goa. In India, the Philippines, and at least one to Florence, Italy. The abolition of slavery was enacted in 1894, but still practiced in some form until the first decades of the 20th century. That's Korea. Now, in Romania, 500 years of Romani slavery. And if you recall the Roma Sinti, there was a genocide during World War II by the Nazis in what they called the gypsy camp. And it was even Jews who survived the extermination camps, even they speak about the horrendous, if you can imagine, the extermination camps were no paradise. And if you're coming from one part of that extermination and you can say that the gypsy camp, as they call it, gypsy camp, the Nazis called it, was so horrific and bad. The mud in which they lived, even the children, you know how terrible that must have been. That even Jews had empathy. They had pity at the conditions in that section of the camp. And theirs was horrible as well. So just think about that. So Romania, 500 years of Romani slavery. The 500-year enslavement of the Romani in what is now present-day Romania is a rarely discussed fact in history, but we're going to talk about it here. We're going to mention it here. The enslavement, and before I go on, recall also that between 75 to, I believe, 80 or 85% of the Roma Sinti were exterminated by the Nazis. That was a genocide, but that genocide was only recognized by Germany decades after World War II. And why? Because the Roma Sinti, they had no one to speak on their behalf. They are the persecuted people throughout Europe, even today, in this day and age. It's horrible, the persecution that they face. And as I say, the Roma, Black people, and Jews, and I didn't say Zionists, I said Jews, are the three most persecuted people on the planet. Everybody poo-poo on them, but especially on black people, because it's very difficult for black people to sometimes camouflage by the color of their skin. Jews can, because wherever they happen to be for generations, they will have the phenotypes oftentimes, or sometimes the Roma Sinti. But the three most persecuted. So let me get now to Romanian 500 years of slavery. As I said, the 500-year enslavement of the Romani in what is now present-day Romania is a rarely discussed fact in history. The enslavement of the Romani began in 1386. So that's CE, Common Era, AD. Shortly after their arrival in the southern parts of present-day Romania in the Principality of Wallachia. That enslavement continued for almost 500 years, ending in 1855, 1856. Chattel slaves, like black people in the transatlantic slave trade, the masters or owners of Romani slaves included landowners, the aristocracy, and the Orthodox Church. See what I mean about religion? Which vehemently opposed abolition. The church did. And was among the last, the church was among the last to free the Romani from bondage. They could sell, make unalive, breed, bequeath them. These are Romani I'm talking. So those slave masters of the Romani, they could, and I repeat now, sell, make unalive, breed, bequeath them. So it's like you're in a, in your will, I bequeath my slaves, I bequeath my pen, right? I bequeath my house, I give my house to my daughter, which is the same thing like Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law, who gave his slaves, including Sally Hemings and James Hemings, America's first professional chef and the foundation of American cuisine. Right? So you bequeath, you give. That's chattel slavery. So they could give all the, the Romanian masters and the Orthodox Church could do all that, bequeath the Romani, gift them, as we see with Alexander Pushkin, as we see his great-grandfather was a gift. He was given as a gift to Peter the Great, and we'll talk about that in video number 4 on slavery. And if needed, have them as little pets, they used to call the black people pet Negroes, or showpieces in human zoos. To prevent them from lying down, Romani slaves were made to wear collars with spikes on the inside. So just imagine the spikes are like this collar. So the spikes are here. They're not pointing out. They're like this. So if you lie down, that spike is gonna get into your neck. You're gonna be made unalive. Like cattle, they were sold and made unalive at will, not unlike the prisoners who are the Palestinians in Gaza, also who are also herded like cattle, displaced to and fro, and culled at will. To emphasize the horrors that was inflicted upon the Romani during 500 years of bondage, we will now quote this passage from How. Now, Michael, and forgive my pronunciation, I'm gonna butcher this now. Kogalnicianu, former Romanian politician who played a significant role in the abolition of slavery, that's in Romania, remembers growing up in a provincial Romanian town and seeing people being with hands and feet enchained, with iron circles around their forehead or metal collar around their neck. Bloody whips and other punishments, such as starvation, hanging over a burning fire, the detention barrack, and the forcing to stay naked in snow or in the frozen water of a river. This is the treatment applied to the miserable gypsies. Well, that's a derogatory term, but that's what they said. The miserable gypsies. Now, this is the Romanian politician. Those, he was describing. And he fought for the abolition of slavery, of the Romani. And that's what he saw. And I guess it really, really touched him when he grew up and saw all of that. So he fought for the abolition, and the church was the last holdout for that. Just imagine that. Now I'm going to mention, I call it diverse mentions of other societies. Just briefly, I just give an overall thing. I zeroed in on Korea and the Romani, and of course the Serer Nunendegi and the Enri. Okay, I just zeroed in on those non-slave societies, the longest slave society in history, unbroken chains in history, and of course the Romani, because that's little is known. Okay, it's not a very well known fact. But whenever I see anything on the Roma, I like to bring it up because most people tend to put them one side and count as if they're not human beings. So I always like to highlight the condition of the Romani whenever I get the chance. Now, diverse mention, other societies. Indeed, slavery was equal opportunity practiced by all masks throughout the ages. It was practiced in the Shang Dynasty, that's in China, that was in 18 before the Common Era and 12 BCE. In ancient Greece, it was practiced. Ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, India, amongst the Mongols, Turkic peoples, Philippines, Nepal, Hawaiian Islands, Europe, including the thralls. That's what they call them in Scandinavia. The Vikings call them the thralls, slaves. Okay, during the Viking Age and the British Isles. Okay, slavery existed in the pre-Columbian Americas. And when I say the British Isles, I'm not talking about That's before, I'm talking before the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, so that's amongst the, like the Anglo-Saxons and what have you. Now, slavery existed in the pre-Columbian Americas among the Mayans and the Aztecs. The Aztecs had different sources and types of slaves. Warriors who were captured during wars were sometimes slaughtered en masse as sacrifice, and some body parts taken home to be eaten by the social elite. Slaves could easily buy their way out of slavery in Aztec society. Slavery was practiced throughout the Ottoman Empire, the different kingdoms, city-states, empires throughout the African continent practiced slavery. Slavery was practiced, and slave was a permanent status in all Northwest Coast societies, from Alaska to California. These included the Chinook and the Clayoquot, the Pawnees, historically of Nebraska and Kansas, and they're now in Oklahoma, also owned slaves. After the arrival of Europeans, some Native American tribes, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, also owned African slaves, who unfortunately were not freed with the 1865 ratification of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution that freed all slaves because they were in Indian country. At that time, not now as some in the current regime would like to assume, Indian country was recognized to be outside of the territorial boundaries of the United States of America. These slaves were freed with the treaties of 1866 between the Five Nations and the U.S. government. You see, even on the Trail of Tears, which I will cover in another series of videos, and this one will be on xenophobia, on the Trail of Tears. Even then, you had some of the Native Americans. They were carrying their slaves with them as well. Now, there are many types and types of slavery we're going to cover now. There are many types and variations and degrees of slavery. Names are often used to obfuscate practices such as serfdom, bonded or indentured labor, forced labor like human trafficking, the sexual exploitation of adults, mostly women and children, and incarceratory or penal labor that we see, for example, in America today, in the South. Child labor, as we see in the sweatshops of South and Southeast Asia, the kafala system in Lebanon and the Gulf states, incarceratory slavery, the replacement, one might argue, of slavery, is practiced in America, especially in the southern states like in Alabama. In an America where too many of its citizens are still obsessed with the dream of enslaving their brothers, the 13th Amendment technically abolished slavery. However, the addition of the phrase, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So slavery exists. If you have been convicted of a crime, you can become a slave. According to that section of the 13th Amendment, that was all about the abolition of slavery. But that section gives the state the right, once you get yourself convicted of anything, give the state the right to have you as a slave. Now that means that hundreds of thousands of Americans are currently enslaved as punishment for a crime, and it's expressly constitutional. America has so much that is wrong with it. My goodness. So much. No doubt, well, so that all countries do, really, all countries, but this bastion of democracy, they got a long way to go. A long, long way to go. No doubt. This is one of the main reasons why America's prisons are filled with black and brown bodies. Through the eyes of the soul, as I will discuss later, the mask imprint, white American, is one into which miscreant souls choose to insert themselves to advance this desire. And we discuss imprint in other videos, what it means when we say a mask, that's an imprint. And that's when we talked about the Lucifer syndrome and supremacist ideology and practices. So that's one of the imprints that you would get into so that you can enact such behavior. I'm not saying now that the imprint white American means that all white Americans are like that. No. You have miscreant souls who will choose that imprint because based on the law, it will give them the right to do that because it all depends on the soul. It's not the white American imprint. But if you get into that imprint, you can commit certain things and get away with the crime. There's no consequence to your bad actions, right? Your incorrect actions. Now, in this type of slavery that the 13th Amendment allows, there is cooperation between the state and private companies. Example, in the case of Alabama, the state takes at least 40% plus restitution of what the inmates earn, which is less than fair market value. In other words, there's a lucrative partnership between the state and the corporations that is not beneficial to the inmates who are punished if they are ill, for example. Although the Alabama State House, has passed laws that might humanize this practice, the governor, mask, and I give the mask of the governor, the mask of race is white, the mask of gender is female, and the mask of political persuasion is Republican. Back to the good old days politics. So she is a white, or the governor is white, female, Republican. She found a way to work around what the state house forbids. You see, the imposter justice of man. There is an exception to every rule. So she found a work around this. The governor is proof that the masked gender female does not dictate the actions of an individual, and that the world would not be a more just world with more women in power. That's poppycock and hogwash. Indeed, the world would not be a much better place if women were ruling it. Nonsense. It's the character that determines, not who you are, male or female, because many women, and the statistic shows us that women who are bullied at work are usually bullied by other women. Now, this also shows us that there are exceptions to the laws of man, as I said. There are no exceptions to the laws of the universe that show neither favor nor fear. The law of cause and effect, karma, regardless of who we are in this earthly life, will always balance the scales through the truth that is reincarnation and its many facts, even for those who believe that they can cheat karma or believe that they are above the laws of the imposter justice of man. Justice delayed is justice denied does not apply to the justice of the universe. Now we're going to get on to sources for slaves and slave trade networks. Now, what are the sources for slaves back then? How and where were slaves obtained? Slaves were obtained through wars fought for slaves, like in the kingdom of Dahomey and the Dahomey Amazons or the Minnow, or as a byproduct of wars such as in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, or during the wars that the Aztecs fought, or the Crusades. Throughout the world, throughout the ages, prisoners of war became slaves. Slaves were also obtained through descent or birth, their offsprings, as in the Americas, in the Northwest Coast indigenous societies, ancient Egypt, Korea, and the transatlantic slave trade, Romania, and Babylon. So, I am a slave, my children will be will be slaves. And their children will be slaves. So you will have 400 years of slaves, right? Down, down, down through the generations. Then you have punishment, right? Debt, you become like these prisoners there in Alabama. They're like slaves, right? It's punishment according to the 13th Amendment. Then you have debt payment, like you can't pay your debt, so you become, call it a slave. You have to work until your debt is paid off, which is one thing that in India that they had, where, or still do, where poor people, your daughter's getting married, and so you borrow all this money from your landlord or the landowner to pay for the wedding, the dowry. And so you end up working the rest of your life to for free so that you can repay the debt. So you have that debt payment. You have self-sale. So you can sell yourself, or you put children that you don't want into slavery. Children sometimes sold by their parents and other family members to stave off starvation. Slaves were of every origin, family, every mask. So anyone, slavery was anyone, whether you're white, brown, pink, green, or whatever. Masks determine slaves and slave owners according to the context, wherever you happen to be. Right? So it would determine who a slave was. Like if you were in Rome and you were Roman, not a become Roman, but you were a Roman, you would be a slave, right? If you were of something, whether you were white or brown or black, and you were from someplace else, you could be from one of the Germanic tribes, then you might very well, you would be a slave, right, in Rome. So it's equal opportunity. It was equal opportunity. So as I said again, mass determines slaves and slave owners according to the context. For example, after the racialization of slavery, the masked race in most cases determined who was slave and who was slave owner in the Americas. And we'll get on to the racialization of slavery in the next video. Other masks determined other masks that determined slave and slave owner was religion. Christian, Muslim, pagan, and socioeconomic status, as in Korea, for example. Scholars assume that in ancient Greece and Rome, most enslaved people were European, North African, and Middle Eastern, including the Medes. That's what we call Persians. However, there were also enslaved Africans, for example, in Crete. Homer describes Ulysses, squire and most trusted companion, the herald of the Greeks, Eurybates, as dark-skinned and curly-haired. There were also Aesop, the fabulous, meaning he told fables, right? You know, the Aesop or Aesop's fables, right? The fox and the sour grape, that sort of thing. With evidence such as the animals and artifacts present in his tales pointing to perhaps African origin. So that's the proof that they have, is the animals about which he spoke, for example. You find them no place else but south of the Sahara, sub-Saharan Africa. For the last almost 1900 years, the main reservoir of slaves were sub-Saharan Africans, Germanic, Celtic, and Romance peoples north of the Roman Republic, the Poles and Caucasians, meaning from the Caucasus, right? Not Caucasian as you know it, like you're white, so you call that Caucasian. When I speak about Caucasian here, I'm talking about from the Caucasus. Slavery has depopulated and displaced entire societies. The Ndembu in Africa uprooted and migrated to escape slave traders. Other societies, like those of Muscovy, what we're talking about now, Russia, and the Baya of what is now North Cameroon, created garrison states. The Serer had two large migrations, as previously mentioned, to escape enslavement. and conversion from the Islamic jihads. The village of Baltimore in Western Cork, that's in Ireland, was depopulated by Barbary pirates. They kidnapped the whole village. The Black Sea, and I will go through this later on. Not do I go through? Yes, I will go through this. I will tell you about, or maybe I did here. Yes, it's in this part. In this part. Sorry, I thought it would be in another video. The Black Sea slave trade, and the Black Sea, that's around Ukraine right now. The Black Sea and Ukraine and Turkey. I think is my geography good? I think so, yes. I think it's shared actually. Depopulated parts of the Caucasus and Eastern Europe. Sub-Saharan Africa was perhaps the most depopulated in the past 1500 years of any region, with as many as 30 million of its inhabitants kidnapped or made unalive because of the transatlantic slave, up to 11 million, and the Arab, Islamic, and Indian Ocean slave trade. And that one's up to about 40, between 9 and 14 million. And others say maybe up to 17 million. These figures, as I say, might be higher. This slave trade induced depopulation, facilitated the conquest of the African continent without much opposition, as we will discuss later in the case of Southern Africa, and I'll do that in my series of videos on xenophobia. To this 30 million, we can add another 8 to 15 million slaughtered by Leopold of Belgium. That's King Leopold of Belgium, known as the Belgian Bull and the Butcher of the Congo. That's the man with the hands, the bucket of hands. A large number, sometimes the majority of those who were kidnapped for the slave trade during a journey, whether via land or water, to the slave market, they often perished due to starvation, hunger, disease, and harsh treatment. For every one slave that survived the often harrowing journey to the slave market in Crimea, taken by nomadic peoples like the Tatars and the Nogai, who preyed on sedentary agriculturalist peoples, many more died from disease, harsh treatment, or the climate. So they might have taken 20 slaves, 20 people they took to sell, but only one out of the 20 might have survived to be sold. So 19 died on the way to the slave market. There were slaves who died by suicide, as in the transatlantic slave trade, when some people would jump overboard, or in one example, the Igbo landing, discussed later. I'll talk about that later. The indigenous Taino of the Caribbean would sometimes commit suicide by ingesting the poison of the cassava rather than allowing anyone to enslave them. And some, of course, escaped into the hills. A lot of them mixed with the escaped Africans, and you find a lot of mixed uh, people in the different maroon towns in Jamaica, for example, and some of them have Taino ancestry as well, like Taino in their ancestry. And like my maternal yes, grandmother and great grandmothers, they also have Taino ancestry mixed with African. Now, we're going to discuss the slave trade networks. There were three major slave trades: the Black Sea slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and the Islamic Arab Indian Ocean slave trade. In addition to these three major networks, there was the Barbary slave trade and the Trans-Saharan trade. Slave trading and slave markets existed in North Africa from before the days of ancient Egypt. Any trade network throughout the ancient world into the latter part of the second millennium Common Era, CE, also included slaves. So slaves were a part of any trade network. I mean, the world, all continents, basically, it was just normal to have slaves. Trade slaves as if you were trading gold or salt or glass beads or silk or whatever. It was just normal. Trading human beings. And that was on all continents. In most ancient societies, it was just a normal, everyday thing. The Trans-Saharan trade route was no different. In addition to salt, ivory, and gold, slaves were a very important part of that trade network. Many slaves came via the Trans-Saharan route from sub-Saharan Africa and were sold in the slave markets of North Africa to traders who made their way to different Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries. And this would be in CE mostly. Now, this what I just said here about the trade of the sub-Saharan Africans going via to the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries. Millions of people from sub-Saharan Africa were taken via this route. There was also a much smaller trade going in the opposite direction, which included women, bought by rulers of empires, such as that of Mali. So these were not black women. They were other colors of women, such as that of Mali and Songhai for their harem. So the time of Mansa Musa, for example, purportedly the richest man in the world that the world has ever known, right? You had an Askia Mohammed, for example. So for their harems, they had a smaller amount of trade involved women going from north to sub-Saharan Africa. Slave markets are once again operating in Libya, where African migrants and refugees trying to reach Europe are now being sold. This includes children who are subjected to sexual abuse and violence. The Barbary slave trade also provided slaves to the slave market in North Africa. The Barbary Coast pirates, privateers, and corsairs, with their large fleet of galleys emanating from the North African states of Morocco, Tunis, Algiers, and Tripoli between the 13th century and 19th century roamed the high seas and oceans from the Mediterranean to Iceland, the British Isles, and as far away as South America, looking not only for gold and other items, but more importantly for slaves. Before the transatlantic slave trade, the Barbary merchant fleet transported slaves and gold from the south to the north of the African continent. With the depopulation caused by the transatlantic slave trade, as well as the Islamic, Arab, Indian Ocean slave trade, and a new source of gold from the Americas being transported to Europe via the Atlantic Ocean, they turned their sights to piracy on the open seas with a new source of slaves. These slaves, normally sold in the slave markets of Algiers, were the crew, the passengers, and villagers taken from the coastal communities, as was the case of Baltimore in Cork, Ireland, where most of the community of English settlers and local Irish were kidnapped on June 20th, 1631. Now, the Barbary Coast Corsairs, a colorful band, a rather colorful, I would say, band of strange bedfellows, most united in their quest for riches, counted among its ranks not only Muslims, they're really colorful, and North Africans, but also Christians, Muslim converts, Europeans, and women. Yes, there were women corsairs, there were women pirates, and I cover that when we get onto the topic. We'll get onto the topic about the mask of women, gender, and what have you, and talk about those women pirates. The pirate expedition in Cork, Ireland. Walter Raleigh had a castle there, one of those tower castles in Cork, Ireland. Previously mentioned, was led by Dutch captain and Muslim convert Murad Reis the Younger, with a crew comprised of European renegades and Algerians. One of the most powerful Barbary pirates was Englishman John Ward, also known as Jack Ward, aka Sparrow. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Who converted to Islam and was then known as Yusuf Reis. He served as an inspiration for the character Jack Sparrow in the movie franchise Pirates of the Caribbean. And that's played by Johnny Depp. He was a breakout character in that movie. Indeed, the Barbary Coast Corsairs were a colorful band of strange bedfellows, as we see in the sacking of Baltimore in Cork, Ireland. In addition to the motivation of riches, some of the Barbary Corsairs were motivated by the desire to avenge their expulsion from the Iberian Peninsula. One of the most powerful of these Corsairs was Sayyida al-Hurra, also known as Lala Aisha al-Alami, who along with her aristocratic family were expelled from Grenada, the last part of Islamic Spain to fall. She assembled a large fleet and controlled the western Mediterranean, and together with Barbaros Hayreddin, who controlled the eastern Mediterranean. So this woman, Lala Aisha Alami, she controlled the Western Mediterranean, and you have Barbaros, who controlled the Eastern Mediterranean. They forged an alliance that seriously limited the activities of the Spanish and Portuguese empires in the Mediterranean. The enormous wealth that Saida al-Hurra, Lala, that she gained from her naval activities and her naval battles. She led battles and raids. And that made all the wealth she gathered from those battles and raids made the Moroccan city of Tetouan a major North African city. So could you imagine how much she gathered from all those battles and raids? She would become Queen of Morocco, but was eventually overthrown by her stepson. One famous person, sorry, who was enslaved in Algeria after his capture by Barbary pirates was the Spanish writer Miguel de Cervantes, author of Don Quixote. After spending, Don Quixote, if you know, I think they, yes, not I think, they did have a Broadway show or play, musical, I should say. It's called The Man of La Mancha. To to dream the impossible dream. And he wrote it, Cervantes, who was a former slave of the Barbary Coast pirates. He actually wrote that book, Don Quixote. After spending 5 years in slavery, he was freed after a ransom was paid by the Trinitarian friars. American ships were also captured and their crews enslaved. These are white Americans. The victims of this slavery of the Barbary corsairs were mostly white Christians, but not relegated solely to this group. The Barbary Coast pirates captured, enslaved, and sold between 1 million to 2 million white, mostly Christian Europeans between the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, the Black Sea slave trade network, as previously mentioned, was one of the 3 main slave trade networks. The ports of Crimea and Kaffa, or Kefi, were the most important ports in the Black Sea slave trade, during which millions of people were bought and sold. From these ports, Circassians, Tatars, Abkhazians, Cossacks, Karelians, and others were transported to Genoa, Cairo, Alexandria, and places in the east. Now, the Circassian female slaves were in high demand, and many were taken back to Genoa, where they were sold. And I do believe, I think it's Leonardo da Vinci. I think they believe his mother was Circassian, actually was a Circassian slave. The Black Sea, they were known to be very beautiful women. The Black Sea slave trade declined in the 18th century. Now, the slave trade was perhaps the most profitable over the millennia. Could you imagine? More profitable than gold. Elaborate networks were established for the trade in slaves. The Vikings, who had been the largest slave raiders in Europe, and the British Isles for 500 years, and Russian merchants took East Slavic slaves to the Baltic, gathered them in Denmark, and then sold them to Jewish and Arab slave traders, who would take them to Verdun and from there sold them to Moorish Spain and North Africa. That's quite a trip, wasn't it? Very circuitous trip. In the 9th century, slaves from Western Europe were transported via Marseille, Venice, and Prague to be sold in Baghdad, Caliphate. Africans were transported via Mombasa, Zanzibar, Sudan, and through the Sahara to North Africa or to Europe. Arab traders also transported slaves from Somalia and Ethiopia through the Sahara to the Red Sea or out of East Africa to the Islamic world and India. Many of the males captured in the Islamic Indian Ocean trade were castrated so they could be employed as eunuchs. Babies were either made unalive or left in the wilds. These elaborate networks account for the different pockets of people, groups like the Circassians, in addition to expulsion and genocide, and Africans in the most unexpected of places. It was obviously through one of these elaborate networks that Gannibal, the great-grandfather of Alexander Pushkin, now very much agreed, okay, because once they thought he was from Ethiopia, was taken from West Africa, not Abyssinia, Ethiopia, that was the name, as first thought, to the slave market of Smyrna, which I believe is modern day Izmir, in what is now the modern day Republic of Turkey. From Smyrna, Gannibal was transported to Russia as a gift to Peter the Great. Now, throughout the 19th century, slavery continued along the Pacific coast of South America. Polynesians from the Marquesas Islands and Easter Island were the targets for Peruvian slave traders following the emancipation of most black slaves in New Spain after the many different liberation movements. The Polynesians were put to work in the guano industry and the mines in Chile and Peru. Guano, and lots of people wouldn't know what guano is, but guano is the accumulated remains and excrement of bats, birds, and seal. It contains nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. And what would that make? That makes for a very rich fertilizer. It can be and was used for gunpowder, actually, or other explosives. Mountains of guano accumulated over millennia are found on bird islands and in bat caves. If I'm not mistaken, I do believe that guano, something like guano, like during the Civil War in America, was actually used. I think mostly by the South, by the Confederates, to as ammunition. I'm pretty sure, but you can check and see. But I believe I am right, and if I'm wrong, I will post it below to say I was wrong. But I believe that they also used it as ammunition as well. Now, slavery and displacement due to genocide, in tandem with ethnic cleansing, war, and environmental issues, have been and are the reasons for population groups in unexpected places where these groups form a sizable group. Now, groups of different people, groups of African descent, and Circassians are two examples. Often, the majority population in these countries are unaware of these groups residing in their midst, as in the case of Iran. While the African populations resulted mostly from the Islamic, Arabic, Indian Ocean slave trade, there were African scholars, traders and merchants, immigrants and soldiers in Iraq before the entrance as slaves. Now, the Circassian population resulted from displacement due to the 18th to 19th century genocide, and and that was overseen by von Sass, Grigory von Sass, who collected their skulls. He was a morbid man, and he was a supremacist. He was just a true miscreant, actually. He collected the skulls of Circassians um, to give to his friends, and some of them, studied the skulls because they thought they were the perfect type of skulls, and he kept them in boxes in his house. It's just horrible. I think I discussed that later on in xenophobia. I should say, I will discuss that in another series of videos on xenophobia. Now, where am I here? While the okay, so I have that. The Circassian populations resulted from displacement due to the 18th to 19th century genocide and the Black Sea slave trade network. Circassians are found in Israel, Libya, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, and throughout the rest of the Middle East. In addition to the groups that we will discuss here, there are Afro-Yemenis, Afro-Abkhazians, Afro-Sri Lankans, and others. We will now look briefly at a few of the population groups of African descent in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, India, and Pakistan, and a few of Circassian descent. Africans first arrived in Iran as traders over the millennia, and later as slaves via the Islamic, Arab, Indian Ocean slave trade and Portuguese traders. According to Dr. Benaz Mirzai, the arrival of Africans as slaves spanned two periods: the Qajar dynasty and which is between 1795 and 1925, Common Era, AD, and the early years of the Pahlavi dynasty, which is 1925 to 1979. Many of these slaves came from Ethiopia and Zanzibar and adopted the last names of Hibashi. In the case of the former, and Zanzibari in the latter. So if they came from Ethiopia, it was, Hibashi, and Zanzibar, Zanzibari in the latter to indicate their origins. Female African slaves worked in the royal and wealthy households alongside Georgian, Circassian, and other slaves. They also worked as wet nurses. Male African slaves worked in fishing, agriculture, and as soldiers in the military. Most Iranians are unaware of the fact that there is an Afro-Iranian community in Iran. Many Iranians believe that the dark skin of Afro Iranians or Iranians is a result of the heat experienced in the South and refer to them as the black people of the South. Afro Iranians live mostly in the southern provinces of Sistan and Baluchistan, Hormuzgan, and Khuzestan. Dr. Mirzai um, estimates that they make up about 10 to 15% of the population in these provinces. Currently, there are about, she estimates, 800,000 to 1 million Afro Iranians living in Iran. Now we have Afro Iraqis, estimated to be as high as between 1.5 to 2 million in Iraq. Afro Iraqis live primarily in the Basra province of Iraq and are a marginalized group who suffer much discrimination. Some in Iraq still refer to their Afro Iraqi brothers as Abid, which means in Arabic slave. Africans first entered Iraq at the beginning of the Islamic conquest with 7th century accompanying General Utbah bin Ghazwan as migrants. Sailors, traders, soldiers, laborers, farmers, and religious scholars. So that's from the 7th century. That's, near the beginning of Islam. Right after it was, it began under Muhammad. Now, however, it was in the 9th century, during the Abbasid Caliphate, that the majority entered as slaves to drain the salt marshes east of the city of Basra, the slave trade capital of Iraq, and to work in the sugarcane fields. And we will discuss later what happened to the Zanj rebellion. That actually influenced a lot of other rebellions in the years after, in the centuries, I should say, after. Very famous rebellion. It went on for years, I think for probably more than 8 years, but we will discuss that in the next video. Now, Afro-Indians or Siddhis, and in Pakistan they call them Shidis. Africans went to India via 2 ways: as traders, merchants, mercenaries, and indentured servants, and that is from BCE, before the Common Era, and later during the Islamic, Arab, Indian Ocean slave trade, and the Portuguese slave traders in places like Goa. Now, the slave trade, especially that of the Indian Ocean, accounted for the majority. African women served as concubines. African men were prominent in the Deccan sultanates of South India, and because they had no ties and were loyal, they were often trusted by the Deccan Sultanate, because hereditary powers were usually weak, resulting in too many conflicts. For this reason, like the African slaves, serving as soldiers, military leaders, and administrators, slaves from Central Asian countries such as Afghanistan were also similarly employed. And so it was when Razia, the first and only female Muslim ruler of the Mamluk dynasty, and that was between 1206 to 1290 CE, of the Delhi Sultanate, took as her sorry, that was her birthday I just gave you. The Sultanate, that dynasty lasted from 1206, because it looked sort of short, or was lasted from 1206 to 1526. Where am I here? Sorry about that. Took as her confidant. Okay, so the first and only female sultan, okay, took as her confidant the African Jamal ud Din Yakut. According to Dr. Diouf of the Schomburg Center, and I'm going to quote her now, Africans were successful in India because of their military prowess and administrative skill. Some of these observations were also made by the ancient Greeks of the Nubians, or Ethiops as they call them in ancient Greece, as archers. And well, Nubians were known as archers from before ancient Greece, from the time ancient Egypt, going way back. The Mongols were also known as top archers. So on foot, the Nubians, no group anywhere surpassed the Nubians. The Romans also used them, actually. The ancient Egyptians used them as well. And then now when it came to the horses, obviously, the Mongols, no one surpassed them on the horses. The feats they could do on those horses as archers, it was just absolutely remarkable. So the Nubians and the Mongols, one on foot, other on horses. And I imagine the Nubians, after a while, even in ancient Greece, not just in Rome, but also in ancient Greece. But I imagine in ancient Egypt, at some point, they were probably as well in the chariots, those little light chariots that the Egyptians, what should I say? They advance, the chariot from the Hyksos had heavier chariots, and then the Egyptians, once they mastered those and they made them very light, then they became the most powerful of militaries that you had in the ancient world. Just a little tidbit there. I just decided to add. I love history. You know that I love history, so I like to add little things. Now, Malik Ambar was the founder and architect of the city of Aurangabad, and the Habshi, that means Ethiopian. Remember, Zanzibari is from Zanzibar. Habshi is from Ethiopia. Rose to unrivaled power in India, keeping the Mughals, Marathad, Portuguese, and others at bay with the help of the Janjira fort that he built. Still there. Malik Ambar of the Ahmadnagar Sultanate ruled as de facto leader for 26 years between 1600 and 1626 CE, and was an avid patron of the arts. Between 1486 to 1493, a Habshi dynasty ruled Bengal. Today, populations of Afro-Indians, Pakistanis, or Shidi in Pakistan, as I said, are found in the lower Sindh and in Karachi in Pakistan. Most Afro-Indians or Siddhis live in Hyderabad, Karnataka, and Gujarat in India. Now we have Afro-Turks. Afro-Turks are another little known group of Africans resulting from the slave trade. There are as few as 25,000 and as many as 100,000 Afro-Turks living in Turkey today. While there had been some black slaves, mostly eunuchs, earlier on, the numbers would see a dramatic increase with the European ban on slaves from the Balkans and Caucasus during the 19th century. As many as 250,000 African slaves were brought from the east coast of Africa into the Ottoman Empire in the Izmir, was called Smyrna back in those days, to tend to the cotton fields. It was one of the main slave trading cities in the Ottoman Empire. As previously mentioned, General Gannibal, the great-grandfather of the Russian writer, novelist, and playwright Pushkin, passed through this port before he was gifted to Peter the Great. The African slaves were freed in 1924 after the father and founder of the Turkish Republic, or the Republic of Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, established laws of equal citizenship in the new republic's constitution. It was also in 1924 that Greece and the new Turkish Republic exchanged populations on the island of Crete. Among the Turkish population that was sent to Turkey were Muslims of African descent who were not Turks. Think about that. It is believed that some Afro-Turks tried to marry out their blackness to escape discrimination. Many look at Afro-Turks or other black people in Turkey, that is, and make the signs to protect them from bad luck that can come from looking at blackness. You see, bigotry, discrimination, equal opportunity. Perhaps due to the centuries old debunked hamification, I call it, of black people by some in the Abrahamic religions, that is in Muslim, Christians, and to a lesser extent, Judaism. And I will get into that later on, what that means, the hamification. It's the whole story about Ham. You know, black people were cursed because they're the children of Ham, with looking at Noah's nakedness or whatever, but I will get into that later. Some Turks, other ethnicities and races, derisively in Turkey refer to Afro-Turks as Arabs because of the blackness of their skin could mean that they're either black or Arab. Now, we'll go on to the Circassians. As previously mentioned, Circassians mentioned as diasporic are found in many places around the world due to the genocide and expulsion, displacement carried out by the Russian Empire, and because of the Balkan, Caucasus, Black Sea slave trade through the ports of Crimea, Izmir, and others. Circassian slaves, women for the harems and men for the armies, were highly valued. The city of Genoa controlled the port of Crimea. Many Circassian slaves were transported to Genoa, and the mother, as I said before, of Leonardo da Vinci was reputedly a Circassian slave. Circassians are found in Libya, Israel, Egypt, and other countries in North Africa. Circassians were part of the group of Mamluks, slave soldiers who in the 9th century rose to form an elite military class during the Abbasid Caliphate in Iraq. Mamluks were originally comprised of Turkic peoples and later added Circassians, Abkhazians, Georgians, Armenians, and others. They established several Mamluk dynasties, including in Syria, Egypt, Syria, and India. The Mamluk Sultanate, 1250 to 1517. That's how long it lasted. So that's almost 300 years. In Egypt and Syria was credited for defeating the Mongols. Could you imagine? And halting their expansion into the Levant. If you remember now, the Mongols, Genghis Khan, and then you have his grandsons, Kublai Khan, and then Tamerlane. Well, he was a destructive one. But under the Mongols, they had the largest contiguous empire in history. Now, the British had the largest empire ever in history, and as they would say that the sun never set in the British Empire. The Mongols had the largest contiguous, but with the British, right? It wasn't just one continuous land empire. They'd have to, it went over the oceans too. So they had in, places on the different continents. The Mongols now, they had that empire that stretched land over the land. So it was the largest continuous land empire. So it stretched from one end of, Asia to Europe and throughout, right? So it was pretty big. And under Kublai Khan, they had what they call it, the Pax Mongolica. So there was peace. First, when the Mongols, they were very we know the story. They were very was a bloody conquest, wasn't it? Going from, and you hear the stories, and I speak about some of the conquests and what they did. They were not nice. But I guess no conquest is nice, is it? But after they had conquered, I know they were the sole rulers, if you want to call, over from, of this large empire. So then the Silk Road, and then that was during the time of Marco Polo. The Silk Road now was very quiet. You could travel from place to place with the different trade networks and systems, all the way to Southeast Asia and what have you, and in peace and quiet, and especially during the reign of when you had Kublai Khan in China. Can't remember the dynasty that he actually started. Was it the Yuan dynasty, I think? So there you had peace at that time. So the Mamluks, they were the ones who prevented them from going further. They put a stop, should we say a kibosh on their empire expansion. And then, of course, it was the Mamluks in Egypt as well, in that Egypt, Syria, who also put a kibosh on the Crusades. There was never ever another Crusades after they put a halt to that. That was the end of the Crusades, because there were many different crusades going on, right? So let me get back to my reading here. Now, according to historian, this Mamluk dynasty can be divided into a Turkish period, which is from 1250 to 1382, during which time it reached its height. And then you have the Circassian period, which goes from 1382 to 1517, and then that's the time it went into decline. The periods are so named due to the change, and you could guess that, in the ethnic origin of the majority of the Mamluks at that time, in the Egypt-Syria dynasty there. The Mamluk period of the Delhi Sultanate in India lasted 84 years. Now, we have seen that slavery is equal opportunity. Most societies have engaged either as facilitators, captors, or captives, and owners. And as a matter of fact, most societies have engaged as all of those. And in this despicable ultimate power play, that's what slavery is. It's the ultimate power play, when you can own your fellow human being. He can only smile when you say smile. He can only eat when you allow him to eat. And you think even maybe bathroom breaks, he could only have that if you choose that he doesn't have one. Well, he won't have one. That's the ultimate power play. That's the ultimate in the playbook of supremacist ideology and practices. If only we knew we are all tenants on this earth, not here to have dominion over our brothers, or over anything for that matter on this earth, because to what end? Now, all actors, whether in the role of enslavers, enslaved, or facilitators, in this ultimate power play have worn many masks, including gender, religion, politics, race, ethnicity, and social status. Muslims were not allowed to enslave other Muslims, and that pushed many, as they went around converting, to convert. Many people converted so they could escape bondage. This was the case among many who converted but refused to be Arabized. They took the religion, but they didn't take the culture. Like groups in the Caucasus, right? There were Muslims, no doubt, who were enslaved by other Muslims. That's a fact. We wonder about instances such as this in the case of different groups from the Caucasus, including the Circassians, who were often taken as slaves throughout the Middle East. The women were seen as rare beauties. Christians were not allowed to enslave other Christians. But Black people in the Americas, even when they became Christians, were still enslaved. We have seen the Tatars as both captive and captors. Slavery is indeed equal opportunity. And now, thank you for visiting my channel in our first video on slavery. The other ones will not be so long, I promise you. Please do not forget to subscribe, give a thumbs up for like, share, and leave a comment. As usual, I like to end with this. None of us is without blemish, and although I appear harsh, I must deliver the messages as I get them. What I do and the collective, as harsh as we sound, wish that all of us would do better and recognize that we're all brothers. Hate hitching a ride, hate a contagion, a cancer metastasizing, an opportunistic bacteria, the cloud waiting to block the sun, hate waiting to hitch a ride on the train of love, hate the rat on its rat passage, hitching a ride on the boat to the plague, hate the bedbug waiting for our suitcase, hate the roach riding on our coattails, hate the shadow always lurking behind, sometimes longer than us, hate just lurking behind the thin curtain, waiting for its turn on center stage to take us to a place not so far away, a blast back from civilization to barbarism, from knowledge back to ignorance, from wisdom back to imprudence. Hate never takes a holiday, always looking for the opportunity to hitch a ride on the train of love. Hate inhabits the same house as love within us. As I like to say, we're all tenants on this earth, not here to have dominion or to rule over anything or anyone. We're not here to have dominion over the fowl of the air, the fish in the sea, or the beasts on the fields. Let us be good tenants. We're not here to rule or have supremacy over our brothers. Let us take care of ourselves and of each other. Let us trod ever so lightly and take care of this planet we call Earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. Remember that there is something that is greater than us, and that is the fatherhood of God. And we respect and show our love for that something that is greater than us by taking care of ourselves, the planet, and of each other. That's the brotherhood of man. And remember, we cannot fight for or on behalf of that something that is greater than us. That something that is greater than us never promised any of us any lands. That something that is greater than us has no chosen few. We're all his chosen. That something that is greater than us is not so vindictive, nearsighted, that he would bequeath unto any of us any lands. Because what? Seas and oceans rise and cover lands. Volcanoes erupt and cover lands with ashes and lava. And earthquakes swallow us and our belongings. Never allow anyone to feed you that Kool-Aid. That's something that is greater than us bequeath or gave unto any of us any lands, because we are the chosen ones. No. That something that is greater than us is not like us. And I want to say, thank God that that something that is greater than us is not like us in our imperfect state. So that at least there is hope for each and every one of us. May we never try to flee our conscience so that we will always do correct actions. May we learn to walk a mile in our brother's shoes so that we can see the humanity in each other. May we respect the differences in each other and know that our Creator has no chosen few. May we find comfort in the knowledge that each of us is slated for redemption. None is excluded. May we find solace in the knowledge that it is not a question of if, but one of when. Each of us shall return to our Father. May we know that we are just tenants on this earth and take care of each other, the earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. May we always adhere to the divine principles of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Love. May we know that which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself, for I am my brother's keeper. May the tiny shrouds of light forever illuminate our path through the dark. May peace forever reside within us and between us. One divine, universal love.